Hello, thank you for joining us for a webinar today about how to unlock your beverage brand's potential in distribution, financing, and also scaling your operations. This webinar is part of a series that we put on it here at Manufactured, where we're exploring different consumer categories. We do this once a month, and how brand operators, founders, and investors are navigating in today's climate. So, for example, in August, we focus on beauty, personal care. September, food, CPG. October, apparel, and now, of course, November, beverage, which I'm super excited about. And we have, of course, incredible panelists here for us. I'm your MC, Mike. I'm the community manager here at manufactured.com. Before we get started, wanted to tell you a little bit about Manufactured. Manufactured is an end-to-end inventory solution that helps brands with inventory financing and or sourcing their production. Our goal is to reduce your COGS while also increasing your inventory amounts. So if you're a brand owner, we're going to do a quick poll, but if you're a brand owner that's looking for inventory financing, that, wants to serve that's looking to fulfill a PO or grow on the e-commerce side, and if you want to talk with us, please let us know in our survey real quick. Our panelists are extraordinary. Really excited for this. We got Trey Lockerbie, who is the CEO of Booch. Booch is a premium small craft kombucha that is brewed and canned in downtown Los Angeles. I see you guys everywhere. In all whenever I go grocery shopping. Such a really great. Really love the product. We have Emily Heintz, who is the CEO of Séchey. Séchey is an alternative spirits shop and lounge featuring functional and alcohol-free beer, wine, spirits, and mixers. They also as well have their own brand too, Séchey, which just launched in Target, which congratulations, that's amazing. And we have Elliott Cohen, who is director of finance at Ritual Zero Proof. Ritual is the world's best-selling and top-rated non-alcoholic spirits. It delivers flavor and aroma of tequila, whiskey, gin, rum, and aperitif. I'll be honest, I have not tried the product yet, but I'm looking forward to it. As someone who doesn't actually drink alcohol, I'm really looking forward to trying Ritual. And of course, we have Sallie Jian, who is the director, head of ventures, North America at Diageo. Diageo is a multinational alcoholic beverage company. They're massive. Some of their brands include Guinness, Johnny Walker, Bailey's, Smirnoff, and they operate from 132 sites from around the world. And so incredible to have you here, Sallie, and all of you. So let's get to it. Let's get this rolling. We do want to make this. I do want to point out before we get started, we do want to make this as helpful as possible. So if you are a brand owner, if you are an investor, or interested in the space, obviously I know you're here, so you might be one or the other. But if you do have questions for the panelists, please let us know in the Q&A if it has to deal with, of course, operations, scaling, or financing your brand. We really want to make this as helpful as possible. So feel free to share any questions that you have, and hopefully I'll be able to get to it. So with all that being said, panelists, welcome. How are y'all doing?
Great.
Excited to be here.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks so much for taking the time. I really do appreciate it. So I wanted to first start out. This is a really interesting time, no matter which category you're in when it comes to capital markets. It's a tough time on both sides of the coin. It's tough to raise a round of equity, and also on the debt side too, with debt being a lot more expensive than it was, let's say, like 2021, 2020. So how are you all thinking about using debt versus equity when it comes to growing your brand today? Maybe Elliott, we'll start with you.
5 years ago, when our founders, even during a much better time on the debt side, when our founders were kicking Ritual Zero Proof off the ground, they wrestled with should they try to go debt or kind of a la carte equity. Instead, they decided it'd be best to partner with one of the best strategics in the world, which is Diageo and Distill Ventures, the kind of the brand booster and venture capital arm of Diageo. So we're part of their portfolio, and that was from day one. So we did go the equity route, and whether or not that has helped on the interest point side. It's tough to tell, but has been immeasurably helpful on the strategic ideas, on getting the equity at the times when we need it. That's one of the toughest trade-offs for founders, is try to keep as much equity as possible or give some away to the greatest partners possible. And we went the side of, okay, let's raise equity, but do so in a way that won't be a time drain on the founders, so that there is more time to go out and run the business.
So not to put Sallie, you on the spot, or obviously this partnership between a Ritual and a Diageo, but when you also raised equity from a strategic partner like Diageo, was that also helpful in terms of getting you all into retail and actually getting you all into stores too?
Yes, it's definitely helpful to say, hey, look, we're working with Diageo. They've taste tested 50 different brands. They love the brand and our value proposition and our the way that we market ourselves. So that is part of the strategic help as well. It's not only capital, but it's also expansion and recognition.
I can add to that, because you mentioned Diageo and then you mentioned Distill Ventures. So just give a little bit more color on what that is. Actually, is so Diageo, we have there's an organization called Distill Ventures. It's independent of Diageo. There are around a 30-person team globally, and Diageo is the sole investor into Distill Ventures, and they help us, with end-to-end help with our startups and our startup portfolio. And once we have invested in companies like Ritual, a lot of those different members of the Distill Ventures team will go into these different brands and help them hands-on on a day-to-day basis in all kinds of operational support functions, whether it's e-commerce, consumer insights, on sales and marketing, even with Elliott's in the finance function. Ritual, we have a portfolio finance director that also helps him. We have a supply chain team that gets in and helps these brands. So to Elliott's point, having strategic capital, for us, we use mostly equity, and then we can help our companies also help them out with debt on a low interest basis, because they're already part of our portfolio and we're really invested in them because we want to see their scalability and their growth. So we are actually able to offer some of both, but mostly our interests are on the equity side.
No, that's really helpful, and thanks for giving some color, Sallie, to how Diageo operates when it comes to working with emerging brands, and as well as thinking about innovation. That's really helpful. Emily, how do you think about this question in terms of like raising equity round for Séchey the brand, and also just overall how you think about equity versus debt when it comes to growing?
Yeah, I mean, given the challenging macro environment around fundraising, we've had to be very creative in order to scale. So if you would have asked me 3 years ago what our strategy was, my answer would be completely different than today. Also, Séchey is in a white space, right? The non-alcoholic beverage industry. And we are approaching things a little bit differently. So not being a straight CPG brand, not being a four-wall retailer, but really like pushing and challenging the idea of like what an integrated retail market strategy should be for a brand. That is a challenge for most investors. So we had to be creative about looking for financing, and debt financing was the simplest option and the best option for us to take a business that's truly hockey sticking into the next year.
That's great. And so why specifically like debt financing at this time instead of the equity side? I know that of course it's obviously like a really tough time to raise an equity round, but why was like debt like the made sense for Séchey in terms of right now?
It made sense for Séchey because we had commitments from a major retailer that we needed to fulfill. So having paper definitely enabled us to take that path. And we run a small business, very lean, like a very small team. light on capital. So going through a major equity raise, there just simply wasn't time to do both, like run my business and go through due diligence for the right partner.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense when you have like a major retailer, knock on your door and wanting to PO and actually get you through the door. That from a timing perspective, it makes sense why that also makes sense. Trey, how about you all and Better Booch and like a little bit about like your story and arc. When did it make sense for you all? How did you think about raising equity rounds versus on the debt side when it comes to growth?
Right. So Ashley and I started the business with the idea of essentially becoming an alternative to the only player at the time, which was GTs. And we set out to build sort of like a family business at first. We bootstrapped the business for about 7 years and didn't take any outside capital. But what we came to realize is that in this industry, there are these step functions involved where, especially when you're manufacturing yourself, which is something we do, there are these moments in time, these forks in the road where you say, okay, are we really doing this or not? If we are, then we need to kind of take a 10x leap here. And, one example would be Walmart coming to you and saying, hey, we want to put you in 1,000 stores, or Whole Foods wants to take you nationwide. You get these step functions where you want to say yes to as much as it makes sense to, and that requires capital. So I think for us, it came to the point where we said, look, we've done a little bit of both. We've done both debt and equity. I thought Emily put it really well. I think debt makes sense where there's sort of a short-term end goal in mind. Whereas equity is more of that venture, theme where it's more unknown, right? The value creation maybe is a longer timeline. So debt for us has made sense when we had some of those step functions. We needed to finance some inventory or take, equipment financing and that kind of thing. And the venture side has been more on the brand building side, the things that take a little bit more time, take a little bit more investment and to pan out.
How also, no, that's really well said. Trey, why did you also chose to also self-manufacture?
Well, for us, it was a necessary evil in the beginning because kombucha, if it's done correctly, is a living product, right? It actually is fermented. It takes tank time, has live cultures, all these things that co-packers don't want to deal with, right? They just want to blend and run. And so for us, in the beginning, it was a necessary evil. And over time, we saw it as a competitive advantage because a lot of kombucha that's on the market, in fact, most of it is now blended concentrates. And we believe that the reason the quality of our product stands out so much is because we're doing it the right way. We have that control.
Got it. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. In terms of the control and maybe not being able to obviously find a manufacturing partner from that that's able to produce that type of quality, since you are dealing with a live organism. Elliott, how about you in terms of did it did it make sense for you all to use like a co-manufacturer or to self-manufacture in kind of the world of non-alcoholics?
We started with a co-packer, and even though, yes, it is because of the way we're made, there's not many out there. It's tough to find a co-packer, let alone two, so that you have a little bit of safety and redundancy. But that was during the test phase. We needed to first prove to ourselves, prove to everyone, our investors, that this is successful. So rather than spend all the capital building our own production lines or doing it in-house in a small batch system that would be really tough to scale up to, okay, we're ready to roll out. We weren't yet ready to build our own production lines. That could be down the road. That's something that we're definitely, one day would think of. But for now, it's been great working with a couple co-packers.
Was it tough to kind of convince co-packers, since the world of like non-alcs, just the number of brands has kind of exploded the past few years? And I remember, if memory serves me correctly, with Athletic Brewing, they were kind of forced to build out their entire supply chain or manufacture themselves because no co-packer would kind of take them. Why would you do, non-alcoholics? But so I'm wondering, was it kind of tough to kind of convince co-packers that, hey, there actually is like a genuine market here?
There's a little bit of a challenge, and what that led to was shared responsibility of purchasing special equipment parts, where we might help share the cost of a special part on the line, and then over time that would be
Okay.
it would be fully owned by the co-packer. But we also we had to have whether not a full purchase order in place, but contracts in place with some big end retailers, and that would give both us and the co-packer enough assurance that we would sell through.
Got it. No, that makes a lot of sense. Just having that actually you own part of the equipment, the machinery as well. And then down the line, as you kind of as you have proof of concept and as you of course kind of prove there's demand, kind of like the manufacturer can own that. Emily, how about you in terms of how you thought about on the manufacturing side when you launched Séchey, the brand? Were you thinking about working with a co-packer, or were you also thinking about you actually doing it in-house yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I founded Séchey as a multi-brand specialty retailer, but I took a page from luxury apparel, right? Like the best retailers have their own brand. So knowing how, much capital you need to build a brand, the physical store came first, and our e-commerce, figuring out what customers like to drink in this category, the experience. So building our own brand of product was secondary. But when I launched Séchey, I protected Séchey in multiple categories, including alcohol. So from where we sit, Séchey could globally expand, not only as a retailer, but a private label brand in both non-alc and alcohol.
Got it. No, that makes sense. And such an interesting kind of arc too. Going from obviously retailer, and you obviously have stores as well, physical retail as well as obviously online. And then now of course you have Séchey, the brand, which is super, super cool. Sallie, when you're investing and you're looking at emerging brands, how do you think about this question in terms of when it makes sense or whether a brand should be vertically integrated or not? Like when I talked to some investors kind of sometimes they shy away from investors that are from brands that are very CapEx heavy and asset heavy versus they prefer brands that are kind of asset light. But how do you kind of think about this question when it comes to on the supply chain side?
Yeah. And it's interesting because we are selling luxury alcohol brands, and that is the lens we come with, especially when we look at financials and the margin profile, the unit economics, where things should be distributed, whether they're distributed on premises, off premises, or even in like the non-alcohol space. There's a lot of D2C and e-commerce happening. So for us, we want to look for businesses that are creative to the Diageo core business, which means adding, thinking about them long-term, adding them into our portfolio. Will they help improve our financials? And so we look for businesses that have strong margin profile or the ability to scale up and grow their margins. And so we're, looking at brands like, in the whiskey category or the tequila category or the non-alc category, and evaluating all of the unit economics and scalability of these brands, where they are today and their potential in, 5 to 10 years when we might be able to acquire them and bring them into our businesses. Obviously, there's more than just the numbers there. There's, you're talking about co-packers, you're talking about the 3PLs, the whole logistics, the whole end-to-end supply chain. And so we also dig into what the company's plans are, not just today, but what their plans are going forward as they think about, for forecasting, from here to, maybe 6 figures of sales into millions of sales in the next 10 years. How are they actually going to handle that growth? Both just from a capacity standpoint, but also from how are they going to improve their margins with this type of growth too?
When it comes to improving margins, first of all, does a brand that you partner with, do they have to use maybe one of your manufacturing partners or
No.
or kind of the Diageo brand? Do you also then, if they don't, do you have to think about, okay, if we were to acquire this brand down the line, can this seamlessly integrate with our manufacturing side and kind of how much we can bring down margins?
Yeah, we do. We take a look at that. So, with the venture game, it's a long game, and we typically don't evaluate. We think about strategically where this company can go in the next 10 years at a very high level, but we do not plan the integration until closer to sort of the exit option that we set out for each company. And so that's something we agree on with each company from the get-go, like where the exit could look like. And so once they're starting to get closer to that exit option, those triggers, those thresholds, then we start to have those conversations. Of course, we have some of our supply chain come in early just to evaluate what's going on with the business to make as a part of our due diligence. But the integration piece doesn't really occur until we're much closer to the actual exit.
The actual acquisition. That makes sense.
Yeah,
so it's not so much thinking about, okay, since of course it's not a requirement that a brand actually works with one of your manufacturers or preferred manufacturers. That kind of comes down later in terms.
I will say that if we have, we have introduced our companies to different resources of ours, whether it's like glass manufacturers, whether it's brand on the branding side. So we do make those introductions when we see that we have the expertise or we have the network for that. And it's Diageo's network as well as Distill Ventures network that we're able to help our companies on multiple sets of things that they're seeing we're facing.
Cool. That's really helpful. Let's talk about price and pricing and how you think about pricing for your products. I want to first maybe talk to you, Emily, first about this, because you're in a very unique position. You just launched your brand into Target, which again, congratulations. That's a really big deal. But also that, you also have, obviously Séchey started off as a retailer, which obviously it still is a retailer, but you really kind of understand price because of course you're selling products of other non-alcoholic brands, that sort of thing. How are you approaching your price when you launch Séchey the brand, and how also having that Séchey the retailer, was that actually also helpful when it came to actually dictating what your prices should be?
Yes. So I founded Séchey as a multi-brand specialty retailer and to take those learnings to build out our brand portfolio. But as you know, as a multi-brand specialty retailer, the margins are lower. So the idea of having a vertically integrated mix in our store was always there, right? But before we launched Séchey, it was figuring out like where that should be, where should we start? So our project in mass retail is actually a mini multi-brand specialty retail assortment that includes Séchey, the brand. So the way that we looked at Séchey, the brand, our own product, we had to find the right partners because we didn't start out as Séchey, the CPG brand, right? Like we weren't here to build a beverage brand from day one. So it does challenge, traditional models in CPG. And it's a modern integrated retail strategy, which is where we believe we'll be able to take globally and learn what customers like and build out our own portfolio.
How did you think though, in terms of like the price point when you're analyzing kind of other brands, and as well as heading to Target, which is more on the kind of mass retailer side, not as much on the specialty retailer side? How did you think about where to actually price Séchey the brand that actually made sense, that actually then could resonate with consumers?
Good question. So Séchey is a premium positioned brand. So in our store, we actually do not have price resistance because we have launched a store where you're getting higher level customer service, you're getting experience, awareness. There's a tasting salon where you can actually try products. So we do increase our margin relative to the MSRP for most of the products on shelf. That is in the physical store. As we expand our D2C presence, that may change. And then with Séchey's product, since we're not manufacturing directly and we're using a partner, while the margins have increased, and we're still positioning it at a premium price, there are some concessions there, right? Because we're not manufacturing our own product.
Got it.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
And Target is a premium retailer. Like Séchey at Target is positioned as affordable joy, but also premium products.
No, that's also helpful in terms, in terms of also where Séchey sees itself as well in Target too, and it's also great that that's great. Elliott, how did you all kind of approach this too at Ritual? Since I know that you're in multi-channels on the retail side of things, how do you all kind of think about price?
First, we have to have a hunch of who our customer is going to be. And also at the same time, we're not just comparing ourselves to non-alc and other non-alc brands, but also alcoholic brands, and say, what value are we giving to consumers that, compared to what someone would get from the same thing that has full proof alcohol in it. So we have this hypothesis, we're a premium brand, but not super premium, not value. So premium brand. We launched on DTC so we could start engaging and get some dialogue. We understand through some consumer surveys what the income might be. We do some price elasticity tests, and we kind of get a quick gauge within our first 6 months of launching of who is our core consumer, and we have an idea of what their income is. But then looking at alcohol, we're saying, well, we're giving the aroma, the taste, the burn, the ritual of drinking just without the alcohol. So, should we be priced more because there aren't many options? Should we price a little less because you can't get the full buzz of alcohol? So we try to price ourselves maybe just at or just below parity of what our alcoholic counterpart would be. So that kind of affirmed our hypotheses. We see ourselves as a price leader, and we're a premium brand. So $29.99 is kind of a rule of thumb SRP, whether we're going into retail or through our DTC channels. And we've kind of seen over time, a lot of our competitors, some have come down closer to that price, some have gone up closer to that price. And it's a lot of data involved, but we've kind of started premium and have stayed in the premium lane.
No, that's helpful. And also appreciate you mentioning how you think about the relationship between where non-alc should be priced compared to the alcohol compared to the alcohol equivalent. That makes a ton of sense. Trey, how about the role of kombucha? How did you think about pricing for you all, and were you able to bring down your prices slightly just because I would imagine with self-manufacturing, maybe your margins are a little better than using a co-packer, but maybe I'm wrong there. But how did you think about pricing overall, and how did it relate to your supply chain?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think the challenge we've had is, we made the decision for environmental reasons and for product quality reasons, et cetera, to go into a can. And I think only recently did, premium products in cans become sort of adopted. For a while, cans sort of looked like a less premium option. So it was a bit of a challenge to approach the market with a can, but still being the highest quality premium kombucha on the market. So we've always been approaching it kind of like going up against the incumbent in the space and pricing ourselves about 20 cents or so below that, because what we've seen is that the thing that drives the most trial is the price. It's going on promotion, and consumers do seem to be pretty responsive to price. So we always like to be a little bit cheaper than the incumbent because we want to drive that trial, because we find that the conversion rate is very high once people just taste the difference.
And of course, there of course, obviously, then that also leads to hopefully increased velocities, staying on shelf, and so it's almost just making sure you're kind of on shelf and in the retailer's good graces, that they want to kind of keep having you back with that, rather than opposed to maybe, all right, let's maybe price ourselves a little higher than the rest of the game, or a little higher than the rest of your competition. Sallie, when you're analyzing brands to work with and partner with, how do you think about pricing or pricing strategy when you meet a brand?
Yeah. With I mentioned earlier how important margins are for us, and that's it is important. But I have seen some of our brands do some clever things to boost their sales while adjusting pricing. So, I mean, I think like Ritual actually does a really good job of this, and they're using like some of these traditional D2C pricing models of to drive up the average order value. And maybe that's including things like subscriptions, right? We've seen that on Amazon. You subscribe every 3 months, you get 5% off. But over the lifetime of the customer, you'll gain a lot more. And then they also have these bundling options, right? Where you are now getting upsold and buying more, but you're getting a discount. So that still boosts up the overall revenue volume for the business. And so, we don't like to see a ton of discounting, but we do like to see these clever ways of driving up the sales while also, Trey said discounting or bringing liquid lips to get people to try the initial product and then turn them into these repeat customers. And I think that is something the beverage world has taken from a playbook out of other D2C brands. And so I think that's really effective.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense in terms of online, how subscription can really be obviously beneficial if you do have subscribers, and as well as kind of offering different various promotions in order to get them, because bundles too, because of course selling beverage online, beverage is it's a heavy product, it's liquid, it's very, very difficult to actually fulfill in terms of the cost that you have to incur. So so bundling and kind of getting that average order value size up is obviously key. Or driving people from online into to actually go into the retail store as well, and kind of see where they're actually located on their zip code, and see which stores are actually they're close to as well. So actually getting the customer in there.
And there's also like a gamification sort of loyalty piece to it too, where you can lower the prices, but reward people, and then have that drive up customer lifetime value as well.
Mm-hmm. Got it. That's great. That's a great point. We have a question here. We actually have a few questions here. First question is about co-packers. Tisha says she's having a hard time finding a co-packer to work with, or who can produce my product. Any advice? Maybe Emily, I'll start with you on this one in terms of how you thought about finding like the right co-packer for Séchey.
So we actually worked with a partner, an importer, to bring in our own product. And then we're developing our own formulations because of our relationships that are existing after 3 years in the non-alcoholic space. So I'm probably not the best person to answer that question.
So you already had all the relations that makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, I leverage relationships. Yeah, and our future products are being developed by people who came from non-alc and know where to get the product produced.
How about got it. Elliott, how about you? From like the early days of Ritual, how were you able to find your co-packer? If you have also any advice in terms of how to find one for any entrepreneur that's looking to start a beverage brand.
Yeah, it is difficult when you have a unique product to find a co-packer for a space that is emerging. So yes, you could leverage relationships, and you bet that we asked Distill Ventures or Diageo of, do you know anyone? But then again, their Distill Ventures, they'd worked with one other non-alcoholic company before, but it's not limitless experience yet in non-alcoholic. So we did conduct our own search. We'll work with consulting firms. So for example, Whole Brain Consulting, we'll go with them. We'll say, here's the bare minimum. Here's what we're looking for. The consulting firm might start the RFP process and gain feelers and interest from, a final 8 to 10 options. But that's as far as the consulting firm could take it. Then we'll go in and start having one-on-one conversations with our huge list of, can you manufacture this way? Do you have this type of certification? Can you be compliant? And then mini test runs. But using an outside consulting firm who has a huge database of co-packers out there can be helpful.
Yeah, that makes that's a great point. And I think that Trey just shared possibly one in the answer.
Yeah. We've become a co-packer for others. So in a way, I see it from that side of things. I know that Rodeo CPG has put together this list of 1.6 or like 1,600, 1.6K co-mans and what their specialties are. And you just put your email in and you can get this list. So because someone's done the heavy lifting on this question, I just figured it was worth sharing a link as a good starting resource.
I appreciate that. Yeah. And also here at Manufacturer, we also try to help brands to find the right co-manufacturing partner too. So if that's of interest, happy to have a chat with you on that. Sallie, do you have any thoughts too in terms of how to find the right co-packer?
I'm not going to be the best to answer this because our co-packers are Diageo internal. But I think it kind of goes to the integration question you asked earlier, is we do help figure that out over time as the businesses scale and they hit a certain threshold. Then we start to think about how we can bring in our resources to the table and how they can incorporate better. But we typically, leave the companies, the startups to do their own co-packing until it makes sense, just because at the scale that they're at versus we're at, it doesn't make sense to mix until a certain level.
Makes sense. We have another question here from Ryan Lee. I started a wine-based hard seltzer brand, drinklivy.com, that can ship to 40 plus states D2C. Would you focus first on growing D2C to gain traction and leverage with distributors, or building the brand and sales via wholesale in one state, city, region? This is a great question. Maybe Trey, we'll start with you on this.
Yeah. Well, it's hard to say. I mean, my experience was that we started regionally and we went kind of mile deep, inch wide. I do love the idea of finding a way to scale through DTC where you can kind of control your own destiny a little bit more. But there's pros and cons to both. I mean, one thing about starting small in a certain region is you make sure you get product market fit, and you got to test those velocities and make sure it's really sticking before you go invest a bunch, nationwide. It's hard to say. It's really kind of discretionary, I think.
Yeah, that's a great point. I don't know, Emily, if you have
Yeah,
any thoughts on this.
From my perspective, I would say start regionally. I agree with Trey, like build brand enthusiasts that are going to go out and start asking retailers, and the brands that do well, that are smaller in my store, have done that. And it's word of mouth, right? Before going straight to a distributor where you could get lost and lose a lot of money very quickly.
That's really helpful. It's really helpful. Elliott, how about you?
Yeah, regional, the helpful part of regional in this space, because of laws dating back to prohibition, make it very hard to it's harder to scale nationally. It makes more, you're almost stuck in a silo within certain states or regions. So it does make sense to dominate a region, dominate a few states or a region of the United States. Now, if that catches the attention of a national retailer, then it's almost, okay, you have the big fish and you can go out and get enough distribution for that national retailer. The other part of the question I thought I heard was DTC versus kind of wholesale in the store. And I think you could lead with either. I'm sure Emily it's been so helpful to be there in person and learn what's going on at the store level. Like it's so, all the different senses and talking with people, and that's helpful. And then eventually it's okay, well, we can also learn from DTC online. That's kind of how Ritual learned, is what's going on with our online shopper. At one point, it will you'll realize they kind of have to grow a little bit in tandem. If you only focus on one and not the other, then you might not have enough balance to the brand.
Yeah, I think that's a great I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think from somebody, so I obviously don't have a beverage brand. I've talked to though a lot of beverage founders. Definitely from my conversations with them, it's they kind of have said multiple times over and over, go kind of a mile deep, inch wide, and kind of get those velocities up in like, if you're able to get into a couple retail stores, really focus even on getting the velocities up before you expand to another, and making sure that you're staying insured and that you're kind of top of mind for that retailer and that buyer, and then expanding that way. As opposed to trying to maybe go from like a national scale or trying to get the attention from national retailers. That's very, very hard to do, especially when you're young. Anyway, I hope that's helpful. Just based on my conversations, that seems to be not there's one kind of right way, silver bullet to building a brand, but it seems like but from my conversations, focusing on like one region seems to be what some of the brands I've talked to have become successful from. I don't know, Sallie, if you have any thoughts on this as well.
I agree with what everyone has said. Actually, I think that the kind of what's important from that is as a startup, you need to be focused, and you can't try to sell to everyone and everywhere all at once. You have to focus on a few regions, like what the others have said. And also, I think a lot of brands did well during COVID on D2C, but from where we are today, it's a bit different. I think the CAC, the customer acquisition costs for all of these online channels, have grown exponentially. So you have to evaluate for you, like what's a better ROI. If you have a really strong digital capabilities and team to help you with that, I think, working on that, and from that you can gloss a lot of really interesting consumer insights. That could be interesting, but I do think the environment is very, very different now, that you might need to figure out which is working, which are your best channels and best regions, and then just double down there.
That's a great point about as well the kind of shift from the D2C channel from what was happening during COVID, and as well as, of course, like the iOS update and CACs becoming pretty crazy over the past couple of years. How are you all, and kind of the shift towards wholesale? I've heard a lot of investors say too, like, what's your kind of wholesale strategy? You got to go omni-channel if you're a D2C brand. And then, of course, there's kind of like the question of like, is D2C dead per se, which I do not believe D2C is dead. But how are you all in this climate thinking about the D2C channel overall? Because it seems like if you're doing it, if from like a sales perspective, D2C will probably be always your minority channel when it comes to sales volume. It probably will be retail that's and wholesale. That will probably be the majority of your revenues. But at the same time, it's also a way to obviously build the brand and build your presence build your presence from like from a national scale. So how are you all thinking about kind of D2C today and managing that channel overall, and the overall purpose of that channel? Maybe Trey, I'll start with you on this.
Yeah. So, I don't think D2C is dead. I don't think it's going anywhere. I mean, I think Bezos put it that way at some point in time, saying, that's one trend. I think that's pretty secure, as people are going to want more convenience over time. Right now you can get better Booch, to your door in New York for cheaper than some Whole Foods locations. So, it's really interesting how it works. We've, de-emphasized investment in our D2C channel over the last probably 12, 18 months for all the reasons mentioned just a few minutes ago, the iOS update, the CAC costs, et cetera. So we've just seen a organic, steady growth, pretty, nothing hockey stick, but just like a continuous, channel that's, I think over time, going to be a great resource for us. I look at it more as a brand building mechanism as well. We do seasonal SKUs. We do, merch, swag kind of items. This week, I can tease this a little bit, but we have a really cool non-alc option we're doing for the holidays that's launching tomorrow. And so, we get to play around with new items and new products. And because we manufacture ourselves, we can go to market pretty quickly with things like that and test it. So I just see it as a vehicle for that, if nothing else. And hopefully over time, right now it's probably, we're like a 80-20 D2C to retail. And to your point, I think that's probably how we'll continue to go, if I had to guess.
It's helpful. That's great. Emily, how about yourself? How are you thinking about D2C overall, and also kind of balancing as a retailer the online versus in store?
Yeah, well, for Beverage specifically, you mentioned this earlier. It's heavy, it's hard to ship, it's expensive, it breaks. So e-commerce for Séchey has not been a priority for us. The way that I look at D2C is it's a channel. It's not a business model. And I really believe in unified retail strategy, meaning that you're connecting with your customers in multiple ways. And I think it's been very clear in the quote unquote previous D2Cs, and I'm not speaking specifically to beverage, but also apparel, that have raised money on this idea that you don't need retail, only to find out that that's actually the fastest path to consumer discovery, building brand enthusiasts that can then go and buy from you direct. So that's how I think about it. I've been in retail though for 25 years. So I have a very specific point of view that may not apply to every brand. For me, it's been really interesting though to see that play out in real life, right? I'm a multi-brand specialty retailer, but I also need a multi-brand specialty retailer to grow my business nationally and make sure that Séchey is in local neighborhoods. And that's why I founded it, right? Like bringing in non-alcoholic options, making them more accessible for celebration. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think it's a complicated word to me. And I think it requires like a fresh look at how we connect to our consumer.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, it can be obviously a great point for discovery as well for your product, and as well as be able to create the brand. But at the same time, as you point out, like it's really hard to make beverage work online. It's expensive. Shipping's tough. It's just very, very kind of expensive to do, considering that at least one bottle, one can, it's not that much money overall, right? And so so obviously you have bundling initiatives and actually get those AOVs up. But I mean, as one like investor that said on another webinar, not one of ours, but another webinar, said that you kind of make your money when it comes to actually selling pallets rather than selling single orders, single packages. So and of course that's pallets meaning wholesale retail, and then single pallets kind of meaning the e-commerce side. Elliott, how do you think about the D2C channel today?
Well, we were forced to become very savvy at DTC because our brand launched shortly before the pandemic, which meant like we had to prove ourselves in the middle of the pandemic. forced us to get smart. But even that being said, with the internet privacy laws, yes, customer acquisition cost has crept up over the past couple of years, especially, but that makes it harder. But it doesn't mean that we want to give up, especially if e-com is a sizable portion of our business. Even if it's not half, it's sizable. But just to show, we've talked about kind of the full circle, the omni-channel. Somebody was looking us up. We have a strong social media presence. So looked up our website. Our website is a store locator. Store locator drove to the nearest retail location, tried some of our recipes on our website, loved it, went to our website and just went to the general sales at ritualbeverage.com email. And it turns out that was a buyer for Celebrity Cruise Line. So that, single DTC bottle, led to a pallet. So that's why it is important to keep up with both. They reinforce each other.
No, that's and I thanks for pointing out that kind of use case, how actually D2C led to you actually getting a partner, which is great, and actually getting more sales. What are some of the biggest challenges as all your brands have been growing? What have been some of the biggest challenges you face when it comes to scaling up the production and on the distribution side? Maybe Trey, I'll start with you on this one.
That's a big question. The biggest challenges. I think the biggest challenge has been introducing the brand to new regions. Having enough resources to do that efficiently where it makes sense, while also balancing sort of the opportunities that come across. One thing we're really excited about getting to profitability this year is we get to be a little bit more strategic about how we expand. When you're just kind of out there to grow at all costs, you can run into situations where one region's getting more attention than the other, and it's hard to balance. Whereas when you're profitable and you could be, approach it from that standpoint, as opportunities come your way, you can be a little bit more discerning and say, okay, does this make sense for the brand right now, actually, or not? And so that's what we're really excited about. I think that's been a challenge to get to this point, probably is a place where we're profitable and can make those strategic decisions.
And congrats on, on being on the verge of profitability. That's great. That's really great.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, it's really challenging to do. How about you, Emily? What has been some of the biggest challenges when it comes to the production side and also the distribution side? I know that Séchey, the brand, you just got into Target, so that's an incredible on the distribution side. But what's been some of the challenges as well?
Well, finding the right capital and the right partner behind the capital has been hands down the biggest challenge. And then just the vision for Séchey has been a challenge, right? People they're excited about the non-alc space. They see it happening, but it's still very early, right? So I feel I have to convince a lot of people about the category itself. And I know that it continues to grow in the very early stages, but the way that people are drinking is changing, and I don't think everyone's caught up to that yet. So I would say those two things, right? The space we're in and access to the right kind of capital.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. Obviously, especially in this environment too, where you kind of get hit on both sides, the equity and the debt side too, when it comes to finding the actual capital for growth. Sallie, how about you when it comes to when it comes to the advising the brands that are growing? What has been some of the pain points when it comes to upping on the production side or the distribution side?
That is a very broad question. I would say that now, we're seeing, I think the sales of a lot of these beverage companies are tapering off a bit. And so, I think, I mentioned earlier, focus and making sure that, you kind of align on what's working and test things very quickly, including on what you mentioned, the production side, and just sussing out different vendors, sussing out different investors, sussing out different sales opportunities for yourself, because right now, you don't want to focus yourself in the wrong direction, because there are a lot of macro challenges. I don't have a lot to say specifically on like production distribution specifics, but I would say that's my general advice.
Thank you. Thanks for that. Elliott, how about yourself when it comes to ramping up production for Ritual? What has been some of like the challenges in doing so?
In my mind, non-alcoholic spirits make sense. And for many of the people listening, it makes sense. But for most of the country and the world, it's still education. And that could be on the production side or the sales side. So on the production side, a lot of times we approach co-packers and they don't understand what it is. It's built completely differently. It's not an alcohol that was distilled with the alcohol then taken out. It's built to be just like its alcoholic counterpart, but never once was an alcohol. On the sales side, education is even harder, and that's our continued uphill battle. That's the advantage of coming into a new category is, wow, you're one of the first in a new category. The toughest thing is letting everyone else in the country know about it. So, I should also mention Séchey, early partner, great customer from the beginning, but you don't have Emily's in every store who are so passionate and knowledgeable of what your product is and why drink it. If you could do that everywhere, then your velocity in every store is going to be amazing. So it's about finding the right retail channels that understand, will merchandise your product correctly to get the end consumer over the education piece.
So that's a great point regarding your category for non-alcoholic, that customer education awareness for it, and the reason why it exists, and of course why it's such a growing market too, and convincing others that that exists and also that it's delicious. Emily, Trey, Sallie, Elliott, thank you all so much for your time. This has been so much fun. Thank you everyone that has stayed. This has been great. We'll also have this on the replay. Thank you to Manufactured, who is producing this webinar / podcast. This will also be repurposed on our podcast as well. And so thank you all for attending. Thank you for our panelists.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Mike, and great to meet you, everybody. Cheers.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.